unlike type 2 diabetes, which in my opinion is probably the most pathetic situation of people, just succumbing to medication when in fact they could turn to nutrition and exercise and not even be diabetic. I mean, that to me is just so sad and pathetic. And yet we've got 100 million Americans that are either type 2 diabetic or on the way to it, maybe even more than that, depending on the numbers that you look at. But we ran both of these clinical trials, and it just turned out to be, again, for me, life-altering. I mean, I really, going all the way back to like when I was a student, I knew nothing about saccharides other than being a source of fuel for the cells. That was really all I knew about any saccharide, let alone this particular one from aloe vera, and then another one that comes from rice bran. But putting these two things together just creates such incredible health-promoting effects. And so ultimately what we showed, and I'll talk about, just at a high level, both of the results from our studies. In the Alzheimer's study, we showed statistically and clinically significant improvements in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months. Both studies were for an intervention period of 12 months. According to the ADAS-Cog, which is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function in people with dementia. Karl, that's unheard of compared to any type of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise training, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, music therapy, sound therapy, red light therapy. I don't care what the intervention is, certainly not the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia. Nothing else showed that type of an effect in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease that were on average 79.9 years of age. And then, of course, as you well know, from literally birth to death and all of us in between, our entire population, every segment of our society has some issue with brain health that for a person that's dealing with that from the conventional medical perspective, there's just so little that can be done. And yet when you look at nutrition or supplementation or exercise or, anything like that, you have so much better opportunity to actually have recovery or benefit.
Folks, I've said it before. You can go out and buy Prevagen. Sure, go ahead. It won't do any harm. I can tell you, though, there's a lot of crap in it. And for, I don't know, I think it's about the same price. You can go out and buy the best stuff out there, Dr. Lewis Daily Brain Care. And you can really notice a difference. And that's my recommendation. If it was me, and it is me, that's what I do. If it was my mother, I would have my mother do this. So I'm talking about this from my heart. This is not for any other reason than if you know me and you're listening to this show, you know I care. I'm out here to bring information to you to make a difference in your life. So I say, ditch that Prevagen and start buying this stuff. You go to drlewisnutrition.com, that's Dr. Lewis, Lewis, nutrition.com, or karlsterling.com to the sponsors page, as Karl with a K. Click through, check it out, and try a bottle. Good morning and welcome to another episode of Your Health Matters. My name is Karl Sterling and I'm thrilled to be your host. As you know, if you've been listening to the program, the focus here is to bring world-renowned, world-class top experts and researchers in various arenas in the health and fitness areas so that we can learn more to help us to extend our health span within our lifespan, to live a longer life. We've had experts on talking about processed foods and brain health, inflammation, and how we can work towards cleaning that up. We've had experts talking about things like sedentary lifestyles and how, now it's so easy we can press a button and get batteries delivered to our door in a few minutes, or food. But bottom line is, we are a longevity-focused program. And today, I'm very pleased to have a friend and a special guest with me who is the founder of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. This is a plant-based fuel. I've been using it for at least a year. It comes in two forms, and we'll talk about that with my guest shortly. Let's talk about my guest before we talk about the product, though. Dr. John E. Lewis is the founder and president of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. He's also associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. He has spent over 20 years of his career conducting clinical trials in nutrition, dietary supplements, and exercise. He has over 180 peer-reviewed publications in scientific journals. Now, that's a lot. That is very impressive. And his seminal publication in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease not only spurred him to leave academics and start a science-based nutrition company, but also enabled him to be selected for a widely acclaimed TEDx Miami talk. So, without further ado, I want to introduce my guest, Dr. John E. Lewis. Doctor, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hey, Karl, it's great to see you. It's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm doing great, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to share this message with you and your listeners today.
I really appreciate it. You know, we go back. We met through a mutual friend, Mr. Eric Durek.
That's right.
And yeah, I mean, well over a year ago. That's probably a couple of years. I started ordering the formula for myself last year, and now we have at my neuromotor clinic. Training clinic. We have, I order. People buy it here, and they go online and buy it, or they buy it from me. I stock up on it, and they're taking it. I have to tell you what I really love about it is, I gotta reframe this slightly, is I have taken other formulas, and occasionally notice a little bit of difference here and there. But why I stick with this is because with your brain formula, I really feel so much more mental clarity. And as an ADHD king, at 63 years old, I've managed, I think fairly well how to manage a lot of the distractions that I tend to go off on, and this and that, and tangents is really does help me to focus. I also feel like it has a calming effect on me somehow. And I can tell you, even though I've always been a good sleeper, I'm a better sleeper now. And I just love the fact that it's full of, the ingredients in it are what they are, and there's no, for lack of better words, crap in it.
Right.
So, and the other thing too, at 63, I'm a baby boomer. So what we're seeing, as you already know, way better than I do, this population, and older than that, and even some younger, we're starting to see cognitive decline. We have a lot of inflammation. We have gut inflammation. The gut-brain connection is probably all inflamed because of what we're putting in our bodies. And brain inflammation is a thing. Cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, those diseases right now, or conditions, are a higher percentage of the population than ever in history. And so with that said, I want to let you take over here. How did you get into, let's say, designing this product, and what was your original, let's say, inspiration to do it? I just railed on off here in ADHD that I know the dementia and Alzheimer's is high, but it's helping my people who have this, and I love it. But what was your original inspiration for this?
Well, before I answer that question, I would say that in addition to the prevalence of all these diseases that you just mentioned, one thing that people probably know, if they don't, is that the prevalence of these diseases is actually continuing to increase. So there's no conventional perspective or treatment, if you will, in terms of getting a grip on these things. I mean, gosh, the scientific community cannot even come to an agreement on what causes most of these things, let alone what to do about them. So I think that's important for listeners to understand as well, that unlike type 2 diabetes, which in my opinion is probably the most pathetic situation of people, just succumbing to medication when in fact they could turn to nutrition and exercise and not even be diabetic. I mean, that to me is just so sad and pathetic. And yet we've got 100 million Americans that are either type 2 diabetic or on the way to it, maybe even more than that, depending on the numbers that you look at. But anyway, that's another topic. But the inspiration for this entire line of work for the last 20 years, Karl, was really based on meeting two people that came into my life around 20 years ago. Dr. Reg McDaniel, a pathologist out in the Dallas area, who I just owe so much to that man in terms of how he completely changed not just my career, but my life. Dr. McDaniel is he was a practicing pathologist back in the 1980s. And he met through a mutual acquaintance. He met 8 guys that had HIV at that time that came to him and were taking this aloe vera product, and they had no viral load of the virus, of the HIV virus, and their CD4 cells were normal. Total medical heresy. Like, at that time in the mid 80s, if you got HIV, it was pretty much a death sentence. That was just killing people.
Yeah.
That virus. And so Reg, in classic Texas fashion, he thought he was being joked, pranked, whatever. He kept shooing them out. He'd get out of my office. This is ridiculous, whatever. He had no interest in nutrition, but fortunately, those guys would not take no for an answer. And so he eventually looked into why this aloe vera product was letting these guys have, again, listen to what I'm saying very carefully, no viral load of the virus, and their CD4 cells were normal. What we know about that virus is that it completely disables your CD4 cells, your helper cells that are so vital to our immune system's functioning and our overall health. And so it ended up completely, to make a very long story short, it ended up completely changing Reg's life to the point where he stopped running a pathology unit at a hospital in Dallas to practicing nutrition, essentially. And what that means is that he couldn't get any of his physician friends interested. They had no interest in nutrition, but he started researching why these allopolysaccharides were so vital, and it just led him down an entirely different path. I met him, and 20 years later, here we are. We've conducted this research in Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. So that I really have to give Dr. McDaniel a lot of credit for this inspiration.
Wow. Yeah. So when we come back from our first break here, I want to talk more about all of that. Particularly, I really want to get into multiple sclerosis because there is a population with it out there. We see a few people with it here in my clinic. This is really interesting. Wow. So with that said, we're going to head out to a break. You're listening to Your Health Matters here on the iHeart Network. I'm with Dr. John E. Lewis, the founder of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. We'll be back after this short break. All right, Dr. Lewis, can you please share more and just keep going from what we were talking about? You mentioned something about MS. Take whatever pathway you want, but I want to make sure we cover the MS factor here. This is real interesting.
Absolutely. Well, as I was mentioning in our previous segment, Dr. McDaniel and I met through a mutual acquaintance at the University of Miami, and he started introducing me he gave me like a very quick and dirty, lesson, if you will, on the potential and the effects of these polysaccharides from aloe vera, which commonly we think of aloe vera as a great use for a sunburn or a cut or a wound, something topical, but most people don't even understand these polysaccharides, these complex sugars in the aloe vera gel. If you take the water out of that gel, take out some of the other materials, and then you're left with the polysaccharide, and then you concentrate that into a powder of a few hundred milligrams or maybe even a couple of grams, depending on how much you take every day, that's where the real just power comes into play. And so Dr. McDaniel had given a lecture at a conference. A lady heard him giving some very impressive anecdotal reports with people he was working with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And because of losing 4 family members to Alzheimer's in their family, she and her husband decided to donate. They, very generously donated some money to us. Reg was not affiliated with any university, and so he turned to me after he and I had met. We were, again, just getting to know each other really well. But that was the only reason we were able to run this study in Alzheimer's and then in multiple sclerosis, was just through the generosity of, this one particular family who had lost family members to this terrible disease. So we were able to run this sister study. We ran the Alzheimer's study here at the University of Miami. We ran the MS study through a collaboration with a clinic in a small town in Alabama that it's a neurology-focused clinic. They really only treat people with MS. The neurologist there is kind of like that family. His mother had MS, and so it created a personal journey for him to study MS. But we ran both of these clinical trials, and it just turned out to be, again, for me, life-altering. I mean, I really, going all the way back to like when I was a student, I knew nothing about saccharides other than being a source of fuel for the cells. That was really all I knew about any saccharide. let alone this particular one from aloe vera, and then another one that comes from rice bran. But putting these two things together just creates such incredible health promoting effects. And so ultimately what we showed, and I'll talk about, just at a high level, both of the results from our studies. In the Alzheimer's study, we showed statistically and clinically significant improvements in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months. Both studies were for an intervention period of 12 months. According to the ADAS-Cog, which is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function in people with dementia. Karl, that's unheard of compared to any type of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise training, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, music therapy, sound therapy, red light therapy. I don't care what the intervention is, certainly not the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia. Nothing else showed that type of an effect in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease that were on average 79.9 years of age. And oh, by the way, they didn't just have Alzheimer's, they had hypertension, depression, diabetes, lipid problems, different forms of heart disease. I think a couple of them even had different types of cancer. So, very old, very sick folks. And we were able to have this type of finding in their cognitive function. I mean, it was just incredible in terms of, we were hopeful going into it based on some of Dr. Reg's, previous anecdotal work, but we had no idea running a clinical trial what the data would show. So that finding, it was beyond anything we expected or anticipated. We showed also at the cellular level improvement. I mentioned CD4 before in the first segment. The ratio of our CD4 to our CD8 cells, our cytotoxic cells, the CD8s, that's a very important ratio, not just for people with Alzheimer's, but for all of us. We showed an improvement in that. So that's like an overall global assessment of immune functioning. We showed reductions in TNF-alpha and VEGF. Those are two proteins that are inflammatory markers commonly looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first to show that type of finding in people with Alzheimer's. And then we showed an increase of the CD14 cells. CD14 cells are adult stem cells, and they've been shown in other research to actually turn into neurons, which neuroplasticity is now a commonly accepted phenomenon. Sure. 20, 30 years ago, it was not. And we showed an increase in the CD14 cells of just under 300% over the 12-month period. So you put all of those cellular physiological findings together in one part of this picture, and they help to support why the cognitive or the practical side occurred with the ADAS-Cog in terms of assessing cognitive function. And it's just a really beautiful picture that, that first paper was published in 2013. There's never been anything else like that. I mean, really, and again, it doesn't mean to sound like an arrogant statement. There's just been nothing else out there that showed those types of findings in one study in using a dietary supplement like what we now call daily brain care.
Right. And you brought up something that I think is important to, let's say, distinguish is a person with dementia, person with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or anything, whatever they're living with, and if, let's say, it's one of those three things, they are not that. That does not define who they are.
Right.
They might have,
Absolutely.
They might have had cancer, kidney transplant, who knows, heart problems, circulation problems, neuropathy. They live with dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. They are not it or defined by it.
Right.
And I think that's what I find interesting too, is that the positive effects on the brain formula for more than just cognition.
That's right.
Yeah, we got just a couple of minutes left before the next break. Tell me, I want to get into, and maybe we save it for the next segment, but ingredients and how it is that you put these together, but also how they each work, individually maybe, and if they work together somehow, because it's an amazing combination of things that's making all this, these measurable results when people take this.
Absolutely. The formula itself was meant to be like if you compare the difference between a sniper rifle, which I look at as like the pharmacological model, where you take one chemical for one metabolic pathway to try to alter a symptom of a disease. Whereas nutrition is like a shotgun. It's spreading, hundreds or thousands of different nutrients, phytonutrients, elements, cofactors, metabolites, because those are all the things that the cells need to function properly to be able to work. So our conception of this formula that would potentially benefit people with, this condition was that it would be based on the nutritional approach, where again, you give all of these different materials to allow the cells to function properly. And so again, this is not at all the pharmacological model. This is the nutritional model. I think I should also mention that I don't want anybody from this interview to say, Lewis said you use nutrition to treat disease. What we are doing is allowing the body to heal itself. This is guided by the genes. The genes interpret this information that they receive from these nutrients, and then they instruct the cells in how to function properly. So that, again, is a far different paradigm from the pharmacological model. But it's a comprehensive approach to giving the cells all the nutrition that they need at the same time to function properly, and then hopefully restore the body back to homeostasis, because that's what the body's inherent intelligence is able to do if you provide it the right raw materials.
I love that. I appreciate you explaining that too. So I'm just going to say something here before we go to break, because I want to thank you, first of all, not just for being a guest today, but for your support and being a sponsor for the show. Without sponsors, we can't do the show. And if listeners out there, if you've been listening to me for any length of time, you've heard me talk about Dr. Lewis Nutrition and the daily brain care. You can go to karlsterling.com. That's Karl with a K. Go to the sponsors tab, and it's right at the top of that page, and click through. Or you can go to drlewisnutrition.com. That would be drlewis, Lewis, drlewisnutrition.com. Read all about it. It's a really well put together website. You can purchase product on there, and I highly recommend this. It has definitely helped me, and I can say it definitely helps ADHD, because I'm the king of ADHD. You're listening to Your Health Matters, and we will be right back. Dr. Lewis, you mentioned earlier a study regarding multiple sclerosis. And I think everybody knows somebody who has multiple sclerosis. We have quite a few who come in here to my clinic. Please, can you share about this study with us? What were the findings?
I'd be happy to. So as I mentioned in the last segment, we were able to, through the generosity of this one family, run these two trials. And I mentioned some of the findings from the Alzheimer's study. In the MS study, obviously these folks were not as cognitively affected as the people with Alzheimer's were. But clearly, as you know, in dealing with folks that have MS, that they have all these other physical functioning and quality of life issues. And one of the things that I discovered in running this study was that people with MS don't actually die from neurodegeneration typically, or demyelination more specifically. What they ultimately die from is infection. I had no idea that infection is actually the leading cause of death in people with MS. And so the folks in our study, they had relapsing remitting MS, and at baseline, on average, they had 7.9, actually, to be very specific, 7.9 infections at baseline. 12 months later, that was all the way down to 2.5. So that was a huge finding, obviously statistically significant.
Well, can I interject 1 second? First of all, I didn't know about the infection thing. I had no idea. And that change there, what you just said, is enormous.
Huge change.
And this is maybe just a little ignorant on my end, not knowing this, which is not intentional, of course, but is there, generally speaking, in MS, especially relapsing remitting, because we have other types of MS as well,
right?
Do they have a compromised immune system?
No question about it.
I didn't know that.
No question.
So I learn a lot. I love learning stuff. So now I know that. Wow. Okay. Please continue.
In fact, in some circles, MS is not only considered neurodegeneration, sort of at a high level, but it's also considered autoimmunity. So it's an interesting mix of the demyelination in the central nervous system combined with this dysregulated immune function known as autoimmunity. So it's a very fascinating just purely from a scientific perspective, it's a very fascinating form of pathology. But that infection finding for us, again, was just very, very rewarding, because not only are we able to help keep these people alive and help them, ward off infection, but we're also keeping them out of the hospital, out of urgent care, out of all these other treatment facilities where you have this overburdened, as you know, this overburdened medical system spending all this money treating people for things. So it was also proof for us that the polysaccharides are very anti-infectious, meaning that they help you to keep off, virus, bacteria, fungus, whatever the type of infection is. So that was a really nice finding. The FAMS, there's a measure called the FAMS, that's the Functional Assessment of People with MS. Like the ADAS-Cog, that's the gold standard for assessing physical functioning in people with MS. Again, across that 12-month period, just all the different subscales, I think there were only 2 that were not statistically significant, but everything else wildly statistically significantly improved across that 12-month period. So that was another very impressive finding. We had several other quality of life measures. We had a measure called the Beck Depression Inventory that's been around for, I think about 50 years now, 40, 50 years. With the Beck, we showed a nice change, a nice improvement in their depressive symptoms, which obviously if you have MS, you have issues with mood because you're clearly upset, and you don't mentally, you struggle with your physical limitations. And then there were a couple of homemade measures that the clinic used to assess all these different groups of symptoms. I didn't mention on the physical side or on the cellular side, we showed an increase in a protein called epidermal growth factor. This particular protein is very important for remyelination. So to help people with MS have improved central nervous system functioning, remyelination is very important. And epidermal growth factor is one of the proteins that assists the cells in doing that. And we showed a nice increase in that. There's a gene called FAS, F-A-S, the FAS gene. That's kind of like the genetic corollary or complementary view of the immune system. Like the CD4-CD8 ratio is the cellular sort of proxy measure of immune function. The FAS gene is like the genetic look or proxy measure of immune function. So we showed a nice improvement in FAS gene expression as well. So, a lot of the findings in the Alzheimer's study, we had a lot of findings in the MS study as well. So at the end of the day, Karl, over this now almost 20-year period, going back to when we first started running these studies up until literally just a couple of weeks ago, we published our 3rd paper from the MS study. That was looking at the Th1 to Th2 ratio, 2 different components of the immune system. We published a sister paper from the Alzheimer's study back at the end of last year in December. So we have 3 papers we've published from the MS study and 4 papers we've published from the Alzheimer's study, 7 papers combined to support the formulation and the foundation of daily brain care. So this is, an incredibly scientifically supported product. This isn't just, trying to be a good marketer and, coming up with a formulation based on, trends or whatever sounds good, or even if you take it to the next step of going to PubMed and, actually trying to be a little scientific about it. No, this is like between my Dr. McDaniel and some of our other colleagues. I mean, this is my life's work, essentially. For other people that were involved, maybe they wouldn't consider it to that same degree or level. But for me, Karl, this is my life's work. I mean, these findings are, again, just so unique and so novel and potentially helpful to people with these tragic conditions. And so to offer people the opportunity to actually experience benefit using the power of nutrition is just so rewarding for me every day.
That's a beautiful life's work, first of all, because you're changing lives. And, I'm curious about MS. Okay, we have 2 people who come in here with another form of that MS called PPMS, primary progressive. And that's where, generally speaking, the lower spinal area, like L4 or 5, maybe S1, 2, seems to be most affected with some unraveling of myelin and leg control is usually a problem. Bladder control can also be an issue for a lot of them. So have you any experience at all with the daily brain care with PPMS? I'm just curious.
We have several people with MS that are taking daily brain care. I don't know if it's the progressive primary or the relapsing remitting. I would have to go back and actually ask those people what type that they have. But what I can tell you is that they are having beneficial responses, just like the people participated in the study.
And so we just got a little over a minute left, but the remyelination, now, is that throughout the body? Let's say like throughout, not just the brain. Yeah. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay. So remember, we were assessing all of these cytokines and growth factors in the blood. So it wasn't like just one particular organ or tissue, right? This is looking at what's going on in the blood. So you can call this systemic evaluation, if you will.
All right. Yeah, I'm actually writing that down because even though I can listen back to this, I may not hear that when I listen because I tend to get distracted. Well, that is fascinating, Doctor. So we're going to come back for another segment after a short break. Okay, we're back with Dr. John E. Lewis, and he is the founder, creator of Dr. Lewis Daily Brain Care, something I've been taking for about a year, and I love it. I wouldn't go without it. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
I'm not just saying that because you're here and we're looking at each other on Zoom. I'm saying it because you're here because the stuff works for me. I'm a walking testimony for you.
I'm so glad to hear it.
Yeah, and we have a lot of people who use it here. So I am particularly interested, and I'm sure that our listeners will be interested in the formulation. And if you could talk about, how did you pick these ingredients? And how do they work individually and maybe together? And I've got to say this too. You're going to feel the difference. Okay. Tell us, please, inform us, enlighten us about the how it's put together and the ingredients.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate those kind words. That's very gracious of you, and it means a lot to me to hear you say that. The formulation is, again, mentioning or going back to what I said in an earlier segment about the approach is that you need to provide the cells oxygen. Of course, is our first nutrient, and then after that, we need vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, amino acids, saccharides, elements, all these different things. And so again, the daily brain care formulation is meant to provide that as much as possible. It's not a multivitamin and mineral. It's not a Centrum or a one a day, one of those kinds of things. It's a completely different formulation. It's to provide enough of these other materials. So for example, I've mentioned the polysaccharides quite a bit. The polysaccharides are these complex sugars. In our formulation, it's mostly from the aloe vera, the rice bran, and then an interesting plant called Dioscorea, which is a wild yam. It not only has polysaccharides, it's got some other unique materials in it. But these complex sugars, Karl, are so beneficial to health. And I think it's important for me to mention that, we as Americans, for the last half century, basically, every time we've heard the word sugar, we think bad, right? Like we don't even imagine a sugar could be good for us. But these polysaccharides, there are three different types of sugars. You have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And the sugar, based on where it comes from and its biochemical structure, dictates whether or not that's good for you or bad for you. So high fructose corn syrup, we can all agree, is not good for us. It's something that spikes our insulin, it spikes our glucose, it sets us up for all sorts of metabolic problems. That's a monosaccharide. Disaccharide is like table sugar, white sucrose. Again, if you're eating that every day, it's probably not the best for you. But the polysaccharides from aloe vera, rice bran, the wild yam, these types of foods, mushrooms, seaweed, these are incredibly healthy, beneficial substances, nutrients that our cells utilize, guided by our genes. So I want everyone to understand, just because you hear the word sugar does not mean that it's bad for you. It depends on where it comes from and its biochemical complexity. So with that said, no one is eating aloe vera Very few people eat rice bran. I don't know anyone that eats this particular wild yam, this Dioscorea. So these are adding in materials to the diet that you will almost not ever get from food. So this is the idea. This is really the beauty of dietary supplementation is you can't supplement your way to good health. You still have to eat a good diet. And of course, that's a very, very argumentative topic, whether you're vegan or carnivore or keto or paleo or zone or, there's so many different philosophies out there. But regardless of whatever your food philosophy is, you're not getting these particular nutrients from your food, especially these polysaccharides. And so again, that's the reason why they're in this formulation and they all work so harmoniously. The other things in there are things like sunflower lecithin. This is a very nice source of choline. It acts as a natural emulsifier for all of the other ingredients in the formulation. Actually, the aloe polysaccharide does the same thing. It actually acts almost like a carrier. It's very bioavailable itself, meaning that it gets actually into the bloodstream to be able to go to the cells, to allow the cells to utilize this material. But it also helps other things cross that gut barrier going into the bloodstream where it can actually do what it's supposed to do. So the aloe vera serves multiple purposes. Not only does it have its own inherent individual benefits, but it also helps everything else be more effective. The flaxseed in there, people, you hear all this stuff about omega-3, and of course, many people mistakenly think that you can only get omegas from fish oil. That's absolutely not true. Where do all the fish in the ocean get their omegas from? They get it from plankton. They get it from plants. So don't get the story twisted. The original omegas, whether it's a 3, a 6, a 7, a 9, all of those come from plants. So just keep that in mind as well. And so sunflower lecithin, the flaxseed is a very rich source of the omega-3. It also has a compound in it called a lignin. A lignin, again, we're not talking about treating disease here, but it's very anti-carcinogenic, means it helps to keep our immune system functional and surveillant and regulated in the context of looking out for dying, transforming cells that could eventually lead to what we might call cancer at some point. So those lignins are also very, very potent nutritional components that our body utilizes, and flaxseed is generally considered to be the highest source of lignin of any other plant or even animal food for that matter, in terms of anything that we can eat. So it's, again, a very important component to this. Tart cherry, you mentioned that you're sleeping better. Well, guess why it may be true, Karl, is because tart cherry is a natural source of melatonin. I bet a lot of people don't know that. So tart cherry is, again, loaded with all different types of nutrients, and particularly being a natural source of melatonin. Then you have something that's very unique called ultra terra clay. This clay comes from a fresh, deep water lake in Mississippi, and this clay is loaded with all sorts of minerals that, we would classify typically as trace minerals. And so these trace minerals are very important, again, to every cell's functioning, not just in the brain, but literally every cell in the body. And the other interesting component to this clay is that it's a very potent chelator of chemicals, heavy metals, arsenic, PCBs, PHAs, all these different things now that are floating around in our environment. And this clay is a very potent chelator, or when you say chelate, it's something that binds or attaches, and then it helps to pull out all of that synthetic buildup that occurs in the body. It also helps to pull out all the metabolic waste we have. As our cells function, we create metabolic waste. It also helps to get rid of that as well. So those are most of the components to this formulation that, again, just provides a very comprehensive approach really to cellular functioning that is guided by our genes' ability to interpret that information and then instruct our cells on how to function properly.
I love that. Appreciate that explanation so much. Radio minutes are the fastest minutes of my life, and we're out of time. Except, I want to just say this, folks. If you want to learn more from Dr. John E. Lewis, be sure to go to karlsterling.net, because we're going to go overtime. Doctor, thanks so much for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure, Carl. I'll be happy anytime.
Well, great. So go to Karl Sterling, that's Karl with a K.net, for Overtime with Dr. John E. Lewis. That's the only place you're going to hear the extra segments we do that won't be aired. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great day. All right, man, this has been fun. We are officially in Overtime with Dr. John E. Lewis, Dr. John Lewis Nutrition. I'm sorry, Dr. Lewis Nutrition. Doctor, this is fascinating. So you mentioned something in the fourth segment that was aired. You used the word choline. Was that part of a word? Was it acetylcholine or just choline? Because I know choline is something that's a big deal. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So sunflower lecithin has choline in it. So choline is getting a lot of recognition lately in terms of its importance for the brain's functioning. So every cell in the body needs a little bit of choline. And again, it's been increasingly studied for its importance with brain function, essentially.
Yeah.
And so obviously we utilize the assessment of cognitive function as like a proxy measure for how our brain's functioning in lieu of having, like an EEG or some sort of CT scan, or to actually look at the morphology of the brain. We utilize cognitive functioning assessment like we did in the Alzheimer study with the ADAS-Cog to be able to assess how well the brain's functioning. But yes, choline is a very interesting material. It's not exactly a vitamin. It's not exactly a protein. It's some sort of a hybrid nutrient that sometimes gets classified as like a B vitamin. Again, it's not really a vitamin, but sunflower lecithin we have in daily brain care is a good source of choline. There is some, we ran, I'm sorry, we didn't rant. We wrote a review paper looking at different B complex vitamins. And again, I included choline in that section. There is, a difference depending on the type of choline that you utilize. So what appears to be true in the literature is that citicholine, C-I-T-I choline, is actually the most beneficial form of it. But it is also one of those nutrients where you get a lot of it in food. Like if you're eating a lot of nuts, grains, greens, seeds, yes, you should get plenty of choline. So you don't necessarily have to supplement with it per se. If you're eating, again, a wide variety of different types of legumes, nuts, seeds, greens, that you should get a pretty good amount of choline every day. But yes, it's definitely, let's call it a nutrient of rising interest in the scientific community, and especially in terms of its benefits for brain health.
That's really interesting. The past is at least pre-COVID. So let's say 5 years or so, or a little longer. I've been studying more and more about neurochemicals produced in the brain, from whether it's cognitive exercise, if you will, like focus, just focusing, getting fatigued, focusing, or, now this is kind of old news, our brain-derived neurotrophic factor and glial-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, right, GDNF, from physical exercise, let's say. It can come from a lot of things, but an elevated heart rate would definitely be one of the ways. Well, going back to the choline, and maybe you can clarify something for me on this, or not. It doesn't really matter. But I just have this theory as a non-medical person and a not really that well educated. I say I got educated from traveling and researching with people over the world, right? And learning is like from people like you who know way more than me. But one of the things that when people hyper-focus, and we do this a lot here in my clinic, we'll do movement, but we try to attach a cognitive task or memory task with each movement almost all the time, probably 80% of the time, because we want so much to train body, brain simultaneously for a multitude of reasons. One of them could be just multitasking more efficiently, more effectively, so that they get so good at certain things that when they get out the door, they're less likely to trip, fall, get knocked over, and get hurt or something, because They got distracted because they're too good at focusing. But I was looking at research out of Stanford. I think it was Stanford. When we hyper-focus and we feel the feeling of fatigue cognitively. Apparently, noradrenaline is causing the feeling, but at the same time, acetylcholine is being produced and marking the areas of synaptic firings to be strengthened. And I thought that was absolutely in fact, I was talking with Dr. Dale Bredesen, the End of Alzheimer's, the author there and the research behind the RECODE program, because we've gotten to know each other over the years. He was on a couple of weeks ago on the show, and he was not aware of that, but he didn't say that it's not true either. And it was a Stanford paper. So when we look at choline, and I'm kind of doing a Karl tangent, which I'm famous for, but I'll come back. I'm getting better at this at 63. I know what I meant to finish with. Choline, it seems like it's an absolutely necessary, important, vital, if you will, substance or chemical for our brain function and to improve cognition. You also mentioned neuroplasticity a little while ago. Do you think choline helps with the neuroplasticity the way you're seeing things?
Oh, I think so, and there's no question about it. And by the way, that study from Stanford's very interesting. I hadn't read that, but I'm not surprised as Dr. Bredesen was not as well. But one of the interesting things that I didn't mention in our previous segments about our study in Alzheimer's was that we actually showed an increase. It wasn't statistically significant, but we only had 34 people in the study, so it could have been a numbers issue. But we showed an increase of 11% of brain-derived neurotropic factor in our study.
You can measure brain? I didn't know you could measure that. Is that through blood?
Yes, you can measure it in the blood.
No way.
Yes.
That's maybe the hottest thing since Tabasco sauce. I love that.
Right? It really is. So we actually, again, it was not statistically significant, but it was an 11% increase over that 12-month period. We didn't look at BDNF in the MS study, but that's what we looked at in the Alzheimer's study.
That's absolutely fascinating.
And the other interesting piece of that information that I guess I should mention is that we found that people that had a level above 5,000 seemed to be the sweet point or sweet spot, where if you're over 5,000, you have better cognitive function. Your immune function and your inflammatory status was not quite as elegantly consistent. There were differences depending on which direction you were looking at, but across the board, cognitively speaking, if you're above 5,000, you have better cognitive function.
Interesting. So I'm curious. My head is going a lot of directions right now. So it just seems to me, no pun intended, this is a no-brainer. You take this product and you're able to focus more effectively, which allows for probably improved comprehension,
better recall.
Thank you, recall. And we have all these different domains of cognition.
That's right.
Memory too, episodic memory and procedural memory and other kinds of memory, and then direct recall and decision making and spatial cognition, navigating things and planning, being able to plan something.
That's right. Executive functioning.
Thank you. Yeah. So when I think about, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, when I think about the products and what their the intention is of, putting these products in for what they will do, and then having them work together. And this just makes it, you can't not do this. You got to have this. Seriously.
That's right. And you mentioned in our final segment on the show that you take it and you're so enthusiastic about it. I think it's important for people, and I mention this every time someone interviews me as well. I've been on this for over 10 years myself. I've had my mother on it for probably 12, 13 years. My wife started taking it over 5 years ago when she was pregnant. She's now pregnant with our second child, our first child.
Congrats.
Thank you. our first child, when we started introducing Angie to solid foods when she was 6 months old, I started putting it in her food. So she's been on it since she was 6 months old. She'll have way more benefit than I ever did, just starting out at such a young age. But I say all that to say that, much like you, I mean, I believe in this stuff, and I would never sell anything that I wouldn't take for myself. To me, that'd be the ultimate in hypocrisy. But also for me, it's also recognizing the value of these things, like I mentioned in the last segment, that you're not getting them from food. I mean, if you are, you're getting very little of it. So with Daily Brain Care, we've taken the hard work out of the equation for you, and we've concentrated it into this one formula where you can get all of these polysaccharides to enjoy their benefit. And Daily Brain Care, I should also mention to our listeners, the name itself was really chosen for two reasons: for marketing purposes, not scientific per se. Marketing in the sense of, we ran these trials in Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. We make brain-related claims on the label that we can support with our own research. And then, of course, as you well know, from literally birth to death and all of us in between, our entire population, every segment of our society has some issue with brain health, that for a person that's dealing with that from the conventional medical perspective, there's just so little that can be done. And yet when you look at nutrition or supplementation or exercise or, anything like that, you have so much better opportunity to actually have recovery or benefit. And so Daily Brain Care was chosen to be able to leverage our science combined with the need for millions of people out there. But we could have called this product anything. Literally any other name would have been okay for this, simply because every cell in the body utilizes these polysaccharides. And so it's, for your point of like sleeping and, that was kind of like an unexpected benefit. Again, like, you don't necessarily associate sleep with brain health, but being able to sleep well is obviously so important, not just for our entire body, but particularly for our brain. People with insomnia are actually at greater risk of having dementia later down the road, because the brain is not able to clear out all of that metabolic waste that can build up over time and turn into amyloid or plaque or, all this other stuff that people with dementia will commonly have. But all these different effects, I mean, again, and I mentioned a lot of them related to inflammation and immune function. Those are really where I think the polysaccharides are so beneficial, because they function in some way as like signaling mechanisms for our immune system. So depending on what our immune system is doing, and I'm so fascinated by the immune system, because it's not just our first line of defense against infection, be it a virus or bacteria or fungus, but it's actually, if you use the analogy of the symphony, the immune system is like the conductor of the symphony. It's talking to all the other major organ systems, and it's helping everything else to play together and be in balance and function together. And if our immune system is not functioning properly, if it's not surveillant, modulated, it's almost like adaptogenic, right? Like it either needs to be up or down, but you ultimately, at the end of the day, you want those components to be balanced with one another. And so it's so important to help all of that work harmoniously and be functional. And so these polysaccharides, again, and not just from our research, I mean, not just from the work that we've done, but from other scientists and other laboratories around the world, have shown time and time again how these polysaccharides are just so beneficial for keeping that chronic inflammation under control and keeping the immune system regulated properly. So that's just incredibly vital and important.
Yeah, now that is a very interesting topic, inflammation. And I if you don't mind, I want to digress for a moment, because we're not on the air right now. This just goes on YouTube.
Sure.
So there are a couple of people coming on the show soon. Michael Greger's coming on, and
nice.
Yes, I'm excited about that. And Sean O'Mara's coming on. I don't know if you know Dr. Sean O'Mara, Minneapolis-based, but I was talking with both of them recently, just off, just random conversations. talking about dates to get them on. So inflammation is a very, very interesting arena because there are certain people that when I look at them, okay, so for example, you're not one of the people I'm talking about. When I look at you, in fact, when I see the picture, I see, in this brochure, I see a person who looks like probably doesn't have any inflammation. And if you do, it's very low. But there seems to be this look. And it could be somebody who's all, really pretty fit and buffed and maybe defined muscularly and they run marathons and maybe they're into, competitive things, this and that. Yet the inflammation factor seems to show up, especially in their eyes and in their skin. There's just something about it. And it seems, we're talking about Gregor about this, talking about this with Sean O'Mara, especially the effects of inflammation. It's horrible. I mean, this is like a silent
It really
killer.
is.
It's a silent killer.
No doubt.
And that's all I can really say because, but it seems like it's visual, like you can just see it in people. Do you find it to be like this?
No question about it. And I think to your point, I'm not too much behind you. I turned 56 last month, so I'm right there with you in terms of, just a little bit into the Gen X as opposed to the baby boomer era. But yes, I look at the people that I went to high school with, and I've already lost a lot of people from my class. They've already passed on. And those that are still with us, a lot of those folks just look so bad. So they weren't born with bad genetics. They were born with, like me, a family that I grew up in, we didn't eat for health. We ate for taste, quite frankly. And it took my own discovery of becoming interested in health and wellness, nutrition, supplementation, exercise, all these things that we've mentioned that led me down a journey that is where I am today and able to still be very functional. Even at 56, I work out every day. I train very hard. I sprint.
You look really good. You look great. You look very healthy. Yeah.
Thank you. I sprint once or twice a week. I do the 40, 20 times.
You know what? So according to Dr. Amara, that is going to keep your visceral fat way down. Of course, diet does too, but those sprints, he talks about this. It's all over his, YouTube and everywhere. He's been interviewed on some big shows, and I do hill sprints as well. I'm a sprinter, and I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Good for you. And my visceral fat was a little bit high. It's coming down. It still needs to come a little bit more down, but I'll get it there. Because I used to be 300 pounds, too. I'm 6'2". Now I'm 218.
Oh, wow.
300.
Wow.
That was 16 years ago in my drumming career. So,
wow.
Woo, heavy boozer, ate everything in sight. No bueno. But
no,
health scares are what turned me around and actually got me into this business. Now, and I'm sort of interrupting. I'm terribly sorry. But one of the things that I've thought about and I look at is when I see the complexion on someone's face, it more particularly a lot of times, and I'm no physician, I'm just a guy, but the spider veins, maybe up in here, maybe just into here a little bit, just off the nose. Of course, we're on YouTube for this, so if you're listening, you'll have to look at the screen to see what I'm doing. But and then seems to be more so in females, spider veins in the legs. A lot of times that's an indicator of high visceral fat. And of course, maybe some metabolic issues.
Right.
A lot of other issues too, perhaps. And what's amazing to me, I guess what I really want to say with this is how this can be turned around.
That's right.
Genetics. Let's see. Genetics are one thing, and the trigger. Let's see. The lifestyle pulls the trigger.
That's right.
Gregor has a saying, and I can't remember what it is. Like, I can't remember the saying. I knew it yesterday because that's when we spoke. I can't remember what he said. But anyways, pulling the trigger. You could have identical twin studies are fascinating, right?
That's right.
A whole series of twins who are healthy, and then their identical one is not that healthy or very unhealthy. And a lot of times it just has to do with lifestyle choices.
It's almost
Very choice
lifestyle. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And you mentioned the identical twin. That is to me like the perfect proof that genetics are very little in terms of what our ultimate outcome is in terms of our health span and our lifespan. Because if it was completely determined by genetics, then all identical twins would die on the same day, right? Like they would just every pair of twins, they would just die.
I never thought about that. I
Right?
never thought of it though. Yes, that's a good point.
Like you would, both twins would just die on the same day if it was so genetically determined. But yes, it's the analogy is our genes do nothing until they receive information from the environment. And then that's when they either work to our advantage or work to our disadvantage based on the information that we provide to them. But I also didn't mention, for context for anyone listening to our conversation today, that I got into drug-free competitive bodybuilding in college, and that was really the thing that kind of took me, even though I didn't end up doing it for many years, I realized pretty quickly I was not going to do drugs. I wasn't going to go down that route. I just wasn't interested in taking the risks, and I didn't really think I'd make a living as a bodybuilder anyway. And fortunately, I had a little bit more of a brain than that. Not that there's anything wrong with bodybuilding, but just that I didn't think, that was what I ultimately wanted to try to be defined as, so to speak. But it got me into a mode of thinking about how to utilize exercise and nutrition much more scientifically and much more professionally than just kind of being, sort of on the periphery of learning about these things. I really wanted to dive deeply into it. And so I'm always grateful for that in terms of what bodybuilding did for my life and my trajectory, much like meeting Dr. McDaniel and him teaching me about aloe polysaccharides. But you are so right. I mean, the body has this amazing resilience if you change, if you recognize, you mentioned being overweight and drinking. I mean, if people can somehow, as psychologists say, utilize a teachable moment, whatever that may be, and unfortunately, in many cases, that's when you end up getting diagnosed with something, and then it's like, okay, gosh, now I've got to change. If you could do it before it gets to that stage, even better. But still, even when you get to that stage, you have an opportunity to, to change and start making improvements. But I mean, I say we, Dr. McDaniel and I and a couple of other people, we've just seen some amazing things, in particular with utilizing the polysaccharides that, again, I would not want anybody to misconstrue. I'm saying treating disease with nutrition. But again, if you provide these polysaccharides in the face of, either dementia or cancer or heart disease or something else, the body has this incredible capacity to heal itself if you provide those materials in a sufficient dose. And I would just put these polysaccharides up against anything else I'm aware of it in terms of anything Mother Nature provides us. Curcumin obviously has been very well and widely studied, but curcumin, you have to be very careful with the formulations because the liver rapidly metabolizes it, and if it's not encapsulated in a liposome, then it's not you're just basically going to poop out most of it without it doing anything. There are, unfortunately, there are a lot of curcumin products on the market that are not well formulated, so you're basically just wasting your money. But
yeah, interesting. Well, with that said, there's one other thing I was thinking here before we go. I should probably go in a minute and get on this other meeting, meeting. I think, I know what it was. I had Dr. Casey Means on a couple of weeks ago too. She's the author of the book Good Energy. And what I think about with your Dr. Lewis Nutrition brain care, daily brain care, is that, especially now that I understand it more, how it works, let's say the ingredients. I was sold on it without knowing, the details, but now especially I can articulate this to people better and hopefully get more people to use it, because it's like the good energy things she talks about in her book, Good Energy. Our cells at a cellular level and the mitochondria, they need good things to come in, to utilize good things, because
That's right.
God only knows there's enough bad stuff to put in, and I've put a lot in my body over the years, especially booze. But I mean, it's been years since I had any. And, some of the the processed food out there is rampant. It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Right.
But not to say this is going to take care of that. We do need to feed ourselves well. But I love the formulation of the Daily Brain Care. I love now maybe feeling like, whoa, I'm getting rid of some metabolic waste I didn't even know I was getting rid of, which could explain my energy level being improved, increased.
That's right.
My focus, more focus is getting the crap out of my brain.
That's right.
And it's good energy, for lack of a better description. I just happen to have that book on my mind at the moment. So you should write a book, Doctor.
I have.
You did? Where is it?
It's behind.
Wait a minute. I didn't know about that. I'm going to buy it right. Okay, so is it on Amazon?
It is.
I'm getting it right now. And it's called, oh my gosh. Okay, folks, Dr. Johnny Lewis has written a book called The Complete Nutrition Guide to Cognitive Function, and I'm going to get it right now. Thank you, Doc. That's fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
I'll make sure I post a link for that in the description everywhere so people can go. I'm sorry, I didn't know about it. Eric didn't tell me.
That's okay.
I blame it on Eric Direct.
That's okay.
Well, Eric's a great guy. So
yes, he is. I appreciate him introducing us.
Me too. Cognitive function. Okay. Well, got it. Okay. Doctor, thanks a million. Well, I need to scoot out here. Thank you to you for joining me. We're going to do this again.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure anytime.
One of the most insightful conversations I've had. I learned a lot. I have pages of notes going here. So
beautiful.
And to everyone who listens to the show Your Health Matters, now I can say it's on WSYR Syracuse, 570 WSYR. Also on 1510 WLAC Nashville. Both shows are called Your Health Matters. I appreciate you listening. We are at #1 in Syracuse, and our numbers keep going up. We even beat out the country music station, and nobody's ever done that. So
wow.
I attribute it not to me, but the quality of information we get from the quality guests like you that we get. And WLAC is new. I think we're into our 8th episode coming up. Feedback's been awesome, and they're both part of the huge iHeart network. So when this is aired and those links are up, I will send it to you, Doctor, and you feel free to share as you wish. In the meantime, thank you again, Doc. We'll talk soon. Thank you, listeners. Take care of your brain, people. Get the Dr. Lewis Daily Brain Care at drlewisnutrition.com, or just go to Karl Sterling, karlsterling.com, Karl with a K. Go to the sponsors tab. It's at the top of the page. And thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you, Karl.